Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Right, so yesterday, with some slight hiccups as always, 7.4 beta went live, and I have explored the first quest, and I also have taken my time to read through all the nodes of every single quest. Now, that is not to say that I have experienced all of 7.4, hence the reason why I will carry on exploring 7.4 beta live. I plan to explore every single quest 100%, but I already definitely have a fairly balanced opinion, I'd like to say, about this piece of content, and it's very important that everybody watching this video keeps in mind that my intention by no means is to randomly, mindlessly kind of dump on Kabam. No, the entire point of the beta is to give the feedback, and by the end of the exploration, my feedback might be slightly changed. However, as of right now, based on the parts that I have done and based on everything that I have read, I can definitely say that 7.4 feels a lot like Variant 7 did, in a sense that there's very little to nothing new or original. There is no new mechanics, no new nodes really, and it's just a jigsaw puzzle pieced together from 7.2, 7.3, and borrowing some nodes from Cav EQ occasionally, and that's about it. But that in itself could be somewhat frustrating, but you could understand if Kabam is understaffed, which they consistently appear to be, or, they might not have the capacity to completely redesign everything new for 7.4. We do have quite high expectations at this point from Act 7 content, because the first two chapters definitely were amazing. Third chapter, I think, kind of felt a bit under that, but still was a solid piece of content. I believe the biggest problem comes from the fact that 7.4 took the parts of 7.2 and 7.3, but it didn't take the best parts. It didn't take the fun parts. It didn't take the parts that, put a smile on your face. It took the parts that made everybody umph and huff and just be annoyed. At the very least, that so far has been my experience, and reading through the nodes here, there's a lot of the same. A lot of the same pretty much everywhere. So the first thing is the paradox. Now, I know some people do like the paradox mechanic, but at large, everywhere I have asked on streams and whatever feedback I have gotten, nobody's really a massive fan of paradox. And I'm definitely not one of them either. Dealing with paradox nodes disrupt the game, especially in some paradox nodes like paradox combo. It felt so frustrating to consistently have to think whether I'm allowed to hit the opponent. And the rest of the nodes are similar. So paradox buffs basically dictates whether you are allowed to dex. And if opponent does not throw a special attack, then you have to dex or take a ton of block damage. And it just leads to a very, very frustrating experience as soon as AI does something that they inevitably do. Get a bit iffy. Similarly with paradox debuffs, for instance, first of all, you can't bring in any champions that actively apply debuffs, so you will never get rid of them fast enough. And second of all, you need to consistently think whether you are allowed to parry. Paradox combo, I think, is even worse, because you gain a paradox charge every 5 hits on your combo meter, and then you either need to perform an intercept or do something to get rid of them. And it just makes the entire process feel like, I'm not going to say a nightmare, but it definitely makes it feel frustrating. So I personally am not a fan of paradox charges at all whatsoever. However, they're full everywhere. They have like at least 2 paradox lanes, I think, in every quest. So that, to some people, is take it or leave it. My personal feedback and the general feedback of the player base at large on my channel is that Paradox is not a good mechanic. I desperately hope that it is not the future of MCOC, because it makes playing an average fight much more stressful, much more fragmented, and much less fun. So that is the second thing. The next thing that they have borrowed is a lot of nodes from 7.2. And again, unfortunately, not quite the more interesting, more enticing nodes. We have a ton of these superiority nodes, where you have to be either same class with class advantage or class disadvantage, and then you gain X some sort of effect, and then you deal with the fights. And this entire setup wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad. Some of the lanes were very good, some of the lanes were somewhat meh. And the way you could differentiate between the paths that were successful and the paths that were not successful was how often you wanted to just ignore so-called rules of these fights. And these are like some of those. There's definitely plenty of the nodes that I read, where I read the entire summary of the nodes, and I figured I don't want to do any of that. So if I were to clear it, I would just bring in champions, completely ignore these nodes, and, you know, try to play around it. So we have some more Paradox crap. Time ticking time bomb. This node is, again, it's a fairly interesting concept that inevitably people will find a way. But just consider how annoying the point of this node is. Base idea is, whenever you perform a well-timed block, you gain a charge. If you get 3 charges, you take a 15% of burst damage. They give you damage increase with parry vulnerability, encouraging you to parry, but in order to get rid of the charge, you need to strike defender's block. So you can parry twice, but then you need to hit a defender's block twice. And then there's explosive personality in combination with divine barrier and armor break immunity. So let's think, what does this mean? You need to parry, but not too much. You can parry twice, and then you need to hit opponent's block twice, but then they're going to have 2 armor ups. You can do that thing again, so you can have 4 parries, and you need to hit opponent's block 4 times. But if you hit the opponent's block 5 times, you take direct damage from explosive personality. If you do not comply, you take 15% of your max health. So what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What I would do, I would just ignore parry. I'd ignore the parry vulnerability. I would ignore this ticking time bomb node. I'd ignore explosive personality. I'd bring in quite jacked champions. Kingpin. I'd bring in, you know, King Groot. I'd bring in Ghost, who can find openings without having to parry. And that's it. I'd just ignore explosive personality. I'd ignore parry vulnerability, and I'd ignore ticking time bomb and the rest of these nodes, armor break immunity and whatever else. When you arrive at a point when there are 5 nodes and dozens of paragraphs to read through, and player decides that the best course of action is to ignore all of them, that's not making a good piece of content. And this is just one of the examples of one of the nodes, and there's plenty of them like that, where the potential reward does not seem worth the hassle, and the hassle can be kind of like bypassed. That does not a good content make. And then we obviously have more of those class superiority nodes, where you kind of want to do similar things. Like with this one, this class superiority node gives you a disorient debuff, and you can potentially pause your debuffs. Okay, cool. Disorient debuff is not, you know, solid way to bypass a wait, so I'd still probably want to bring in a mole man or something, ignore all of these nodes, and just make sure opponent can't wait, and I'm going to have a fairly straightforward fight. I'd rather counter the champions themselves than work within the nodes, because the nodes do not make it worth it, and nodes make it annoying. And that so far has been my impression of 7.4. I'm not going to say it's going to be a horrible piece of content at all. And again, I still have rest of it yet to explore. But from what I can see so far, I am not a fan of it. I was a fan of 7.1, was a fan of 7.2, less so 7.3, and it's going to be even less so 7.4 if it remains unchanged. They have quite literally copied and pasted the more annoying bits of 7.2 and 3, a few other pieces of content. I did notice some interesting lanes in 7.5 and 6. I'll be completely honest. There were some lanes that, seemed quite fun. But I think from what I read, there were like 4 out of 36 total lanes. So I'm going to mark that as an F, And I do hope that there are changes. Hence the point of this video. Again, keep in mind, I'm not mindlessly bashing. I'm explaining the things that I like and explaining the things that I don't like. Unfortunately, in this quest, this piece of content, there are a lot more things that I'm indifferent to, annoyed by, or just flat out dislike. And that is the point of playing through betas and giving out feedback. I will head to the beta forum as well. Probably make a fairly lengthy post after I have done exploring entire thing. It's my final feedback. But so far from what I have seen, I'm definitely not a huge fan at all. It seems fairly lazy because there's very little to nothing new. It seems that they have missed the idea of things that players actually like and included most of the things that players definitely did not like much, or most of the players didn't like much. And it just fails to put a smile on a player's face. It makes it tedious. It often encourages you to think, how you can ignore all the nodes or how you can play around it, because playing within the rules, within the game that Kabam is trying to set up for you, just does not seem worth it. So that is my feedback for now. As I said, I will post one more of these after I'm done completely exploring it. I'll probably post some cheesy videos in the middle. That being said, let me know what you guys think if you have managed to play 7.4 beta. And see you guys soon. Laters.
Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about